I should have known something shifted the moment the invitation came in a group text. No personal call, no request for help like in years past. Just a smiling message from Fenja. Family event at the estate. Formal. Press will be there. Don't be late. That was it. No, hey Sophrona, could you help with setup? No, can we borrow your folding chairs again? Just a one-way announcement like I was another name on a long list, not the daughter who still lived 10 minutes away. I parked just outside the gravel drive of the estate, watching through my windshield as staff carried catering trays and photographers adjusted their lights. There was a red carpet, for us, for a family that used to do backyard potlucks and mismatched chairs. The air was dry, crisp, the kind that hinted snow would arrive early this year. Inside, the house smelled unfamiliar, like over-polished wood and artificial lavender. I walked past strangers shaking hands, most in sleek cocktail attire, while I wore the only dress in my closet that still zipped all the way. My boots had a salt line from last winter. No one made eye contact except a waitress who offered champagne with a careful smile. In the main room, there it was, the golden plaque on the mantel, celebrating the future of the Hackman family. My stomach tightened. Not our family. Theirs. Fenja stood in the center, radiant in emerald silk, giving a nod to a reporter who scribbled something quickly. She saw me but didn't move, just a lift of her champagne glass. I waved, unsure, then walked toward the buffet, only to be intercepted by a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Oh, hey, Sophrona, could you step out of frame? The lighting crew needs clean space for the group photo. I blinked. I'm family. Shouldn't I be? He didn't let me finish. They're on a deadline, just for this one shot, okay? I stepped back. Not out of agreement, but out of disbelief. The family lined up beneath the chandelier. Mom, Fenja, cousins, uncles, even the pastor who once said I was too bold for a girl. I watched through the camera's viewfinder. The photographer adjusted lenses, framed the shot, and captured the perfect image, without me. As they turned away, Fenja sauntered toward me and said, half smiling, "At least you're not bringing the energy down." Then she was gone. The air inside burned worse than the cold outside. That was when I heard my father's voice in my head, clear as if he stood beside me. The richest people are the ones who make others feel seen. I walked past the framed photo they'd just taken. It was already printed and displayed on an easel. Fenja's caption underneath, "The faces of the future." I wasn't one of them. Dinner was served not long after. The room had been transformed into a long banquet-style setting, draped in linens that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Name cards were placed at every seat. I scanned the table. No Sophrona, not even a misspelled version. I walked down the row again. Nothing. A little girl, my niece, looked up at me and asked, "Auntie, why don't you have a name?" Before I could answer, Fenja chimed in from 3 seats down, laughing lightly. "She's freelance. She floats." A cousin slid over, patting the edge of a chair. "You can sit here if you want," he mumbled, like offering a seat to someone you weren't sure belonged. I nodded politely and walked past him. I couldn't sit next to people who watched me fade and said nothing. I ended up standing near the drink station, holding a tiny plate with 2 rolls and a scoop of overdressed salad. From that corner, I could hear conversations not meant for me. "Isn't it awkward she showed up? Did she even RSVP? She's probably still living in that trailer, right?" I held my fork with steady fingers. I didn't look up, but I listened. When dessert was served, I slipped out. The house's back porch was quiet. I stepped onto the wood planks, letting the cold sink through my dress sleeves. Beyond the tree line, I saw the old shed Dad used to store firewood. The paint was peeling now, but I remembered helping him repaint it every other summer. I remembered him saying, "Legacy isn't money, it's what you take care of when no one's watching." After he passed, no one else visited the shed, or cleaned the gutters, or mowed the west fence line. That was always me. Quietly, consistently, without thanks. I was the only one who stayed in the hospital during his last weeks. I held his hand through his final breath. Fenja came twice. Once with a camera crew. I blew into my hands for warmth. My breath fogged in the air. "Money doesn't change people," I whispered. "It just reveals who they always were." I turned to leave. On my way out, I passed a table with printed booklets, event programs with the family crest on the cover. I picked one up. There was a full-page itinerary. Welcoming speech, photo session, dinner, awards. My name was listed under assistant staff at the bottom, scribbled through with a thick black line. I stared at it for a moment, then folded it in half and tucked it into my coat pocket. Walking to my truck, the night had grown colder. Fog hugged the headlights as I drove out of the driveway. They didn't wave goodbye. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just clear. That was the night I realized I was never truly part of their empire. I was just the help who wore the family name. But what they didn't realize was that the one they discarded held the one thing they were about to lose. The ride home after the party felt longer than usual, though it was barely a 15-minute drive. The silence in the cab of my old truck didn't comfort, it scraped. I kept the radio off, didn't want any noise trying to distract me from the sharp ache settling in my chest. I kept seeing that photograph, everyone smiling, arms looped around each other in crisp suits and silk dresses, and me on the outside, holding a half-empty champagne glass like a waiter who lingered too long. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered, casting long shadows over the yard. I didn't go straight inside. I sat in the truck a while, scrolling through my phone, finding post after post from the event. The same filtered group photo was everywhere. I zoomed in. There was a sliver of my shoulder at the edge of one frame, cropped out of my own family's celebration. My finger hovered over the like button, but I didn't press it. When your absence is louder than your presence, I murmured, that's when you realize you've been erased. I walked into the house with numb fingers and the sudden certainty that something much larger was happening behind my back. A door had been closed, quietly, and I hadn't even noticed the lock turn. The next morning came with sunshine and an unshakable chill. It was my niece Abby's birthday brunch at my sister's house. I'd mailed her a small gift weeks ago, a handcrafted jewelry box I'd spent hours painting. Her name etched into the top, tiny floral detailing carved along the edges. I'd ordered it from a local artisan, someone Dad once called the most honest man in the valley. It was personal, thoughtful. As I walked in, the house was filled with helium balloons and sugary smells. Kids ran past me with icing on their cheeks. I found Abby in the living room opening gifts. "Thank you, Aunt Fenja," she squealed, holding up the jewelry box I had chosen. The same curved engraving, the same paint color, but the card taped inside read in Fenja's flawless calligraphy, "To Abby, love from Aunt Fenja." I froze. For a second, I didn't even register what I was looking at. I smiled. A small one. Because ripping away joy from a child wasn't the kind of justice I believed in. Later, while Abby was distracted with cake and a remote-controlled unicorn, I pulled Fenja aside. "You put your name on my gift," I said plainly, no venom in my voice, just truth. She tilted her head, sipped her mimosa, and replied, "You're not great with presentations, Soph. I made it more polished." I nodded slowly. It wasn't about polish. It was about honesty. Fenja leaned in closer, whispered, "Everything's about perception. You of all people should know that." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I just stepped back, turned toward the kitchen, and quietly noted the pattern. This wasn't new. It was just bolder now, more public. They weren't hiding the theft anymore. They were decorating it. 2 days later, I received an email marked, "Urgent, Family Trust Meeting." It was from an unfamiliar legal office, CC'd to Fenja and my mother. The meeting was a formality, according to the brief note. A signature was needed to ensure clean asset distribution. I arrived on time, wearing the only blazer I owned. The office was sterile, not cold exactly, but indifferent. The receptionist didn't offer a greeting beyond asking me to sign in. I sat in the waiting area for 10 minutes before being led into a boardroom with a long oak table. Fenja was already there, sipping from a stainless steel tumbler like she had nothing to lose. The attorney, young, pinstripe suit, thin-rimmed glasses, seemed surprised to see me. He covered it quickly. "Ms. Jackson, we just need you to initial and sign here, here, and here," he said, placing a stack of dense papers in front of me. Fenja smiled. "It's just to avoid complications with the trust. You know how messy things get when freelancers are involved in inheritance structures." I looked at her, then back at the document. The print was tight, the paragraphs packed with legalese. The words, "release of claim," caught my eye, buried mid-page. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked, my voice low. It's standard, the lawyer said too quickly. It just removes some overlap between categories, Fenja added. Dad wouldn't want things to be tangled. This keeps everything smooth, for everyone. I stared at them both. You expect me to sign this today? The lawyer handed me a pen. Fenja leaned in, her tone soft but tight. Don't make this difficult, Soph. We're all just trying to protect Dad's legacy. I didn't touch the pen. I let the silence thicken. Inside, a switch flipped. Something old and dull fell away. Some childish wish for belonging. And something clearer took its place. I didn't sign. I asked for a copy, tucked it into my coat, and left without another word. At a corner table in the public library, I sat under flickering fluorescent lights and read every word, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. Page 7. Section 3.2. Language that stripped me of any claim to the estate, the land, the trust. It wasn't a clarification. It was a forfeiture. I shut the file, staring down at the name Sophrona Jackson, typed just above a signature line I hadn't signed. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year. Alifair? I asked when she answered. Soph? Her voice held equal parts surprise and curiosity. Hey, I might need some legal eyes for a freelance thing. She paused. When do you want to talk? Soon. I hung up and sat back. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about being written out, on purpose, smiling, groomed, signed away like a loose end no one wanted to deal with. That night, I printed 2 more copies of the document and started a fresh notebook titled Records They Thought I'd Ignore. I dug into the bin under my bed where Dad's old estate papers were kept. Not neatly organized, but not lost either. He used to show them to me like maps. This clause means this. This page is what protects that. They thought I didn't listen, but I did. I sent Alifair a scan and a message. Need your eyes on this. It's urgent. She replied 15 minutes later. Understood. Let's meet. Soon and in person. I looked around the room. Dim, quiet, warm. They underestimated how much I remember, I whispered. How quietly I prepare. As I tucked the file back into its folder, I found a thin envelope tucked between tax records from 2 years ago. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, if they ever try to erase you, don't sign anything before you find the blue folder. I sat at the small kitchen table, the unsigned document spread out in front of me like an autopsy report. Everything was there: motive, execution, and silence. I stared at the words, release of claim, for the 10th time that morning, but my eyes weren't on the text anymore. They were somewhere else. A hospital room. Dim light filtered through the blinds, casting shadows over my father's frail frame. It was late, well past visiting hours, but I had stayed, as I often did. Fenja had come earlier, left after 15 minutes, saying the antiseptic smell gave her headaches. I stayed because that's what daughters do when love has nothing left to prove. He looked at me that night like he knew something I didn't. Reached out, his voice raspy but firm. They won't understand you, he said, but they'll need you more than they'll ever admit. I nodded, unsure what he meant. You're the only one who doesn't want anything from me, he continued. That's why you deserve everything. I wanted to respond, but he wasn't done. If they ever turn on you, and I hope to God they don't, but if they do, walk away with your head high. Let their inheritance be their inheritance. Your peace is yours alone. Those words became the floor under my feet. Even now, as I sat in silence with betrayal circling like wolves, that memory was my warmth, my anchor. His truths didn't come with court seals or legal weight, but they held more authority than anything that lawyer could ever type on his polished desktop. When Sunday rolled around, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Fenja's message arrived at 8:15 a.m. Sharp. Family brunch at the lodge. Unity is important right now. Hope you can make it. No explanation, no apology, just another one-sided expectation dressed up as inclusion. I dressed simply. Dark slacks, a fitted sweater, nothing flashy. I arrived 5 minutes early and parked on the far end of the gravel lot. As I walked in, I could already hear the hum of forced laughter, glassware clinking, that familiar tone of curated warmth. I entered the dining hall to find a long table stretching nearly the length of the room, adorned with white linens, brass cutlery, and floral arrangements that reeked of performative grace. Everyone was already seated. Fenja stood at the head, raising her mimosa. "Let's all remember," she began, "that families thrive on order and knowing their roles. Chaos is what happens when people forget where they belong." A few people chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to. She continued, letting her gaze skim over the table, stopping briefly at me. "Some people force their way into legacy," she said, voice syrupy. "They seep in through the cracks, like sewer trash." The words hit the room like a shattered plate. Utter silence followed, except for the dull clink of a dropped fork. No one moved, no one spoke. A cousin looked down at her lap. Another took a long sip of orange juice. I didn't move either. Not at first. My body registered the words, but my mind was still catching up. My ears rang like I'd been slapped. I stood slowly. Fenja didn't even look surprised. If anything, she looked relieved, like she'd finally said what she'd been thinking all along. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I simply gathered my coat from the back of the chair, though I'd never been invited to sit, and walked out. The doors closed behind me with a gentle thud. Outside, the air was sharp, and I welcomed it. My steps were even. I walked past the row of SUVs, past the decorative garden Fenja insisted be installed in Dad's honor, though he hated ornamental landscaping. I walked until the brunch laughter was a distant echo, until I couldn't hear them, or her. I drove home without the radio on. No need for distractions. I needed to remember every second of what had just happened, because it mattered. Because people get away with cruelty when no one documents it. At home, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand. I opened the group chat labeled Family Threads and tapped Leave Group. I deleted the contacts of every person who'd sat in that room and said nothing. "It wasn't that they said it," I whispered, staring at the blank ceiling. "It was that they believed it, and no one corrected them." I texted Alifair. Me. "I'm ready to talk. Tomorrow?" Her. "Of course. Come by whenever you're ready." I didn't reread the legal papers that night. I studied them, underlined language, highlighted loopholes, wrote down questions. I wasn't going to be baited into emotion again. This wasn't about feelings. It was about patterns. And patterns can be traced. I grabbed the combination Dad had given me months before he passed. With steady fingers, I approached the old safe he'd kept in his closet. The one Fenja said was filled with outdated insurance records. The tumblers clicked into place. Inside sat a single envelope, cream-colored, slightly curled at the edges, written across it in my father's handwriting, "For her eyes only." I didn't open it. I wasn't ready. But I stared at it like it was a mirror I'd been avoiding. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with something close to reverence. "I wasn't ready to open it yet," I whispered, voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. But I knew this time, whatever was inside, would finally prove I never needed their approval to exist. The envelope still sat inside the safe, untouched. I'd returned to it twice in the last 24 hours, each time resting my fingers on the flap, each time pulling back. There was something final about opening it, like whatever was inside might rewrite the last shred of memory I had of my father's voice, his clarity, his warnings whispered at the edge of goodbye. So I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I made copies of the legal document I refused to sign. I tucked one into my purse and folded another into my coat pocket. I stood in front of the mirror and tied my hair back, not for vanity, but control. The kind of readiness you put on like armor. I wasn't going to that house to ask for anything. I was going to draw a line. When I arrived at the estate, the snow was already drifting sideways, soft at first, then sharper as the wind picked up. Fenja's Lexus was parked up front, pristine as ever. I walked through the side entrance, bypassing the grand entryway and knocking twice on the kitchen door before letting myself in. The smell of pine-scented candles hit me first, too strong, too curated. They were both there. Fenja stood by the marble island, arms crossed. Mother sat at the breakfast nook, sipping tea, eyes cast toward the window. I held up the document. "You asked me to sign away my future. Now I'm asking you, why?" Fenja didn't move. "Oh, for God's sake, Sophrona, it was a routine clause. Legal cleanup. Don't make this dramatic." I placed the paper on the counter. "Then explain why it removes me from all property claims and trust access." Mother looked at me then, eyes glassy but dry. "You've always been the unstable one." "That's not an insult. It's just truth." I stood taller. I was the one who held his hand when he died. That's truth too. Fenja rolled her eyes, her voice rising. This house is no longer yours. You weren't invited back. You keep inserting yourself into things that have moved on without you. Because I lived here? I asked. Because I did the work no one else wanted to? Because Dad trusted me? Fenja's tone snapped like a brittle branch. You want credit for being loyal? Newsflash. Loyalty doesn't make you a stakeholder. The silence that followed was thick. Final. Mother set down her cup with a soft clink. You should go, Sophrona, before things get legally complicated. I picked up the document and walked toward the back door. You're not scared of me. You're scared of what I might know. Fenja gave a forced laugh. Oh, please, you're barely holding it together. I opened the door. The wind hit me like a slap. I turned around one last time. No coat? Mother asked casually, almost confused. I didn't answer. They didn't stop me. Outside, the snow had thickened, flakes falling sideways in swirls. My boots crunched across the frozen ground as I made my way to the truck. It was parked far at the edge of the property, beneath the bare cottonwood trees Dad refused to cut down. I climbed in, pulled the door closed, and tried to start it. Nothing. I turned the key again. The lights flickered, then died. The dashboard blinked like a flat line. No service on my phone either. Just the red warning at the corner of the screen. I leaned back, breath fogging up the windshield. The cold crept up my legs, filled the spaces between layers, gnawed through seams. I reached behind the seat and pulled out the emergency blanket Dad insisted I carry. Montana winters can kill you before you even know you're in trouble, he used to say. Don't count on anyone else to come looking. I wrapped it around my shoulders and curled slightly, pulling my coat tighter. Inside the truck, everything was silent. Outside, the storm howled like a warning too late. I sat there for hours, dozing in and out, waking each time colder, more hollow. I kept hearing Fenja's voice, Mother's silence, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my father's steady words from that hospital bed. They'd finally said what they always thought, and I had nothing left to say. By the time light began to bleed through the windshield, the world outside was a blanket of white. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its bite. I pushed open the door with stiff arms and climbed out, knees aching. My boots sank ankle-deep in powder. I stood there for a minute, watching steam rise from the truck's hood like a defeated breath. I wasn't surprised they shut the door on me. I wasn't surprised no one texted to check if I made it home. What surprised me was how calm I felt now. Like I'd crossed some invisible threshold. I was nobody's daughter anymore, and I had never felt more awake. I drove slowly toward town, engine finally rumbling after a long crank. I found a small diner with lights on, walked in with fingers barely able to grip the door handle. The warmth inside hit me hard. The waitress looked up from behind the counter and gave a soft smile. Coffee? I nodded. Black. She brought it over without another word. I sat in a booth near the window, watching the snow melt off the cars in the parking lot. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, hair unkempt, skin sallow, eyes sharp. I took a sip and pulled out my phone. Fenja had posted on her feed that morning. Grateful for snowy nights filled with family, love, and laughter. There were 5 photos attached, all warm, cozy, inside the house I had just been thrown from. No mention of me. No trace that I had ever been there. I stared at the screen, then back at the cup in my hand. This wasn't sadness, it was clarity. I typed a message to Alifair. Me. Change of plans. Can we meet today? Her. Absolutely. Bring everything. I looked out the window again, past the parking lot, past the dripping icicles, into something bigger. They pushed me out in the cold. I was about to light a fire they couldn't control. The warmth from the diner wasn't just physical. As the snow melted off my boots and pooled beneath the booth, I sat watching steam rise from my coffee like it was some sort of divine smoke signal. Across the room, a mother wiped syrup from her daughter's cheek, both of them giggling over pancakes. It stung a little, but didn't pierce. I stirred my coffee slowly. Something bitter had started to taste like resolve. I hadn't spoken since leaving the estate, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was strategy. I unlocked my phone. Alifair had replied. Alifair, meet me in 20, you know where. I paid the bill, left a decent tip, and stepped back into the cold, the wind gentler now. Montana had a way of softening right after it bruised you. Alifair's office was tucked behind a hardware store, more like a converted cabin than a law firm. No marble floors or cold receptionists, just a space where real conversations happened. I parked, took a breath, and walked in. She stood as I entered, arms out for a brief hug. "You look like hell," she said. "Better than feeling like it," I replied, and we both smiled, the kind that knew grief by name. We sat at her worn oak desk. I pulled the envelope from my coat and slid it across. "You said your dad gave you the blue folder?" she asked, already reaching for her reading glasses. I nodded. "He labeled it, 'For her eyes only.' I haven't opened it until now." She opened it carefully, unfolding the documents inside like she was handling something sacred. "Notarized will," she murmured. "Audio cassette. Sealed trust allocation sheet." She looked up slowly. "Sophrona, this changes everything." "What does it say?" My throat tightened, though I kept my voice level. "You weren't just included. You were central, 42% of the estate, and..." She paused, eyes scanning. "You were given sole authority over the preservation trust tied to the land." I felt the air shift inside my lungs. So the thing they wanted me to sign away was never theirs to ask for. My father had protected me the only way he knew how, through precision, not promises. We spent the next hour reviewing the documents, every signature, every clause. The blue folder wasn't a backup, it was the blueprint. I left with copies in a manila envelope and the original sealed again. Evening came, and the air carried a quiet stillness only small towns can maintain. I had a few coats in the truck, left over from Dad's old just-in-case box, and I decided to stop by the local shelter. I handed them over at the front desk, not expecting anything more than a nod. But the woman working that night, gray hair tucked in a wool cap, eyes soft but sharp, paused after taking the coats. "You look like someone who needs to hear this," she said, steady. "You deserve better than what they gave you." I didn't respond right away. Something caught in my chest. "Thank you," I said, voice quieter than I intended. She nodded once and turned back to her work. On the drive home, her words echoed louder than anything Fenja had shouted. That stranger didn't know a thing about my history, but she saw something real, what they all had chosen to ignore. I parked in the driveway, shut off the engine, and sat in silence. Not the kind that swallows you, but the kind that clears space. "I'm not asking for a seat anymore," I whispered. "I'm building the table." The next morning, I met Alifair again. This time, we planned. First, request a legal freeze on all asset movement under the family trust. Second, initiate document review with a forensic expert to verify signature forgery on the papers they tried to pass off. Third, file a motion with the court to enforce the true will and trust document as the binding legal directive. "They're not going to like this," I said. "They don't have to," Alifair replied. "They think you're weak. That's exactly why you'll win." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want resolution, with receipts." We worked through lunch, highlighting sections, building timelines, crafting statements. Every page I marked felt like regaining inches of stolen ground. Before I left, she handed me a folder with a post-it stuck on the front. "Operation Turnaround." I laughed. "You name your case files now?" "Only the ones that matter." I tucked it under my arm and left. At home, I cleared a space on the kitchen table and laid out everything. The will, the trust sheet, Dad's cassette, the forged papers Fenja handed me, my notes. I wasn't drowning anymore. I was assembling. Dad's cassette tape was old, but I had a small player I kept for sentimental reasons. I slipped it in and pressed play. His voice filled the room, warm, gravelly, unmistakable. "If you're hearing this," he said, "I didn't misjudge you. I always knew. You were the one who wouldn't trade integrity for approval." I let the tape run out before hitting rewind. He had spoken that truth without knowing how badly I'd need to hear it. I shut off the player and laid in bed fully clothed, folder still in my arms like a shield. And that's when I stopped being their problem, and started becoming their consequence. I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in silence. Coffee grounds hissed in the old machine, and the smell curled into the air like muscle memory. I poured a mug and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the icy yard. No one moved out there. No one ever did anymore. The tape was already in the player. I hit rewind and then play. My father's voice filled the room again. "If you're hearing this, I didn't misjudge you. I always knew. You were the one who wouldn't trade integrity for approval." I closed my eyes. It wasn't grief anymore. It was focus. I wasn't driven by bitterness. I was fueled by accuracy, by legacy. I checked my phone. New emails. Alifair had confirmed the legal motion was filed. The will, the trust documents, everything from the blue folder was now officially in play. I grabbed my notebook and began documenting. Timestamps, messages, every single email they'd sent. I wasn't going to rely on memory anymore. I was building a paper trail with teeth. By mid-morning, I had filled 5 pages. That's when my phone vibrated off the edge of the table. I caught it before it hit the floor. First call, Fenja. Second, Mom. Third, blocked number. Then another. Then 6 in a row. I watched them light up the screen like flares. I didn't answer. I just sat back and let the buzzing speak for itself. Voicemail notifications stacked like snow. Curious, I tapped the most recent. Mom's voice, thinner than usual. "Sophrona, sweetie, can you please call me back? There's been some confusion. We need you to clarify something." The next was Fenja, brittle but trying to sound polished. "Look, I don't know what you think you've done, but it's fixable. Let's not escalate this, okay? This doesn't have to get ugly." I laughed. Just once. A sharp exhale that felt too dry to be humor. I scrolled through the rest. Cousins. The family lawyer. Even the pastor who hadn't called since Dad's funeral. And then I opened social media. That was when it clicked. A local business account had reposted a screenshot of a group chat claiming assets under review, followed by vague murmurs about trust violations. Another shared a headline from a regional news outlet. "Contested will freezes Hackman estate." The wheels were turning, and they were grinding louder than they'd expected. They were scared. I picked up my pen and wrote in capital letters, "When the powerful start panicking, you've touched the nerve." I didn't call them back. I didn't reply. I took notes instead. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting everything in that golden blue hue Montana saves just for the defiant, I unlocked the safe again. There was still one envelope left, sealed, slightly thicker than the first. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything. Inside was a dated letter, 4 months before Dad passed. The ink still sharp, like it had waited for the right moment. Beneath it, a second cassette tape and a notarized witness form. I sat back, reading the letter. "Sophrona, if Fenja ever challenges this will, she forfeits her claim. That's the clause I buried in the trust, and only you can activate it. Love, Dad." I pressed play on the second tape. His voice was different this time. Less warmth, more resolve. "This isn't just about legacy, Sophrona. It's about protecting the one person I know won't trade blood for greed. You're not a contingency plan. You're the firewall." I let the tape play until it clicked off on its own. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I was the line they never thought they'd cross. And now I had the power to make sure they didn't step over it again. I walked to the living room, cleared off the old corkboard I used for reminders and recipes. Then I started pinning up documents, dates of Dad's signature, copies of the trust, notes from the meeting they'd tried to trap me into, messages from Fenja with phrases like, "just harmless cleanup," and "don't worry about the wording." By the time I was done, it looked like the blueprint to their undoing. Alifair texted, "Motion received. County court has it. They'll issue notices by end of day." I replied, "Good. They trained me to be quiet. They taught me to cooperate. They just never thought I'd learn how to document." Just after 9 p.m., the phone buzzed again. Restricted number. I picked up. A man's voice, clipped and official. "Ms. Jackson, we're reaching out on behalf of your family's legal representation. We'd like to discuss the possibility of a private resolution before this becomes unnecessarily public." I waited 3 seconds. Then I said, clearly calmly, "Let them come. I've been invisible too long." It's time they remembered who they erased. By the time the coffee cooled on Alifair's desk, I'd read through every line of the injunction 3 times. Not out of confusion, out of certainty. This wasn't war, this was history control. And I wasn't preparing to fight. I was preparing to document it before they rewrote it again. "They'll come to you now," Alifair said, sliding a folder toward me. "Not out of guilt, out of fear." I nodded. "Then I won't give them the luxury of panic. I'll give them paperwork." Just as I gathered my files, a knock rattled the front door. I didn't need to check. I already knew who it was. I opened it to see Fenja and Mother standing like polished sculptures, their coats perfectly pressed, faces unreadable. "May we come in?" Fenja asked, as if she'd been invited to tea and not the scene of her own unraveling. Alifair arched a brow but gave a tight nod. I led them into the front room. Fenja was first to speak. "We're not here to fight," Mother added. "This has gone further than any of us intended." They didn't sit. They hovered. Fenja pulled a document from her bag. "This is just a clarification form. It helps the bank untangle certain reporting overlaps. It's really for their benefit." I said nothing, just stared at her. The quiet pulled her words apart. "It's not about you," she added. "It's about protecting Dad's image." Mother folded her hands. "You've always been emotional, sweetheart. This is bigger than just feelings." I took the form and read it slowly. Then I looked up and said, "You didn't throw me out because of confusion. You threw me out because you were terrified I'd see what you were hiding." Fenja's smile twitched. "You were never part of the plan. We let you stay so you wouldn't embarrass us." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was confirmation. They didn't come to negotiate. They came to test if I'd still bow. And they forgot. I stopped kneeling the night they locked me out in the snow. I placed the document back on the table and slid it toward them. "You can keep this. It doesn't fit me anymore." They left without slamming the door. It was worse than that. It was careful. That evening, I sat at my kitchen counter, sipping lukewarm tea, heart steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of calm strategy pressing in where anger used to live. Then I remembered something. Months ago, when I first moved back into the house, I'd had the old security system reactivated. Quietly. Just in case. I pulled up the app on my phone and began reviewing footage from the kitchen. Sure enough, while I'd stepped into the bathroom during their visit, the camera above the cabinets had kept rolling. On screen, Mother leaned in close to Fenja. Her voice, though soft, was unmistakable. "If she signs, we're clean. If not, we let the media spin her as unstable." Fenja didn't hesitate. "She's a loose end, not family." I paused the video. The blood drained from my face, but not out of shock, out of precision. I hit save to device. Then I sent it to Alifair with a message. Exhibit A. Her reply came in less than a minute. "We'll use it, every single word." The next morning, I filed a private injunction on all financial movement involving the family trust, citing attempted coercion. Alifair prepped a motion with the recording attached. I didn't post online. I didn't whisper to cousins. I didn't need the audience. I walked to the same diner as always, took my seat by the window, ordered black coffee. The snow outside was quiet, steady. I watched a child make a snow angel, while her father waited nearby with the car running. I stirred my coffee. I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. And they weren't family anymore. They were data points in a case file. That night, just before bed, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I let it ring twice before answering. "You think you've won?" Fenja's voice, disguised but undeniable. "You don't even know what you're inside of." I smiled. "No, Fenja. You're inside a case now. I'm just the one pressing charges." And the part that made me smile, I hadn't even played my strongest card yet. The invitation didn't come from Fenja. It arrived via email from the family's attorney. That in itself was all the context I needed. No heartfelt note, no explanation, just a subject line. Family tribute dinner, attendance requested. It was scheduled for a Saturday night in a rented banquet hall downtown that looked more like a wedding venue than a space to grieve or reconcile. Marble floors, gold-rimmed stemware, a 3-course menu printed in italicized fonts. All appearance, no affection. I didn't go to reconnect. I went because there was nothing left to salvage. And I was tired of pretending I didn't see the fire just because everyone else brought marshmallows. I arrived alone, head held high, in a black dress I hadn't worn since Dad's funeral. Tucked in my coat pocket was a USB drive. It didn't rattle, it didn't burn, but it weighed more than it should have. Inside, waiters moved like ghosts in tuxedos, brushing by tables filled with people I used to trust. Fenya stood near the stage, already in full host mode, hugging guests, shaking hands with donors, holding court. Her eyes caught mine, and for the first time, she didn't smirk. She nodded. Just once. Dinner hadn't started yet. Guests took their seats under chandeliers. At each place setting sat a booklet titled Legacy, the Hackman Family Story. I flipped mine open and skimmed the contents. Every page was curated, edited, cleansed. There was a single line about me. Sophrona Jackson, artist, independent spirit. No mention of the trust, no mention of my care for Dad, no photos, just a throwaway sentence dressed up in flattery. I put the booklet down. Fenja stepped on stage, her voice smooth as always. Thank you all for joining us tonight. As you know, our family has faced a season of change, but we are here to honor the man who built our legacy, Robert Hackman. Polite applause. And before dinner, we'd like to share something special. A video message Dad recorded a few months before his passing. His final words to us as a family. The lights dimmed. A projector hummed to life. A video played. Dad appeared on screen, his shoulders frail, but his eyes sharp. He began to speak, but something felt off. He praised family, legacy, strength. It was polished, and I recognized the cuts. Pieces were missing. Key parts, words he had emphasized when we were alone. When the screen faded to black and the room erupted in applause, I stood. May I play the full version? Murmurs swept across the room. Fenja took a step forward. That was Dad's message, Sophrona. Let's not... But I was already walking to the side table where the AV tech sat. I handed him the USB. Play track 1. No edits. He hesitated. I looked him dead in the eye. You'll want to hear this. He clicked play. Dad's face filled the screen again. This time, no smooth transitions, no fade-ins, just his voice, uncut. If you're hearing this, he said, it means what I feared came true. A pause. And if you've treated Sophrona with anything less than dignity, you don't deserve a dime. Gasps broke through the silence. One cousin dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, unnoticed. Fenja's face went pale. Her mother's hands clenched the edge of the table. Dad's voice continued. She was the one who stayed, the one who didn't ask for anything, the one who gave more than she ever got back. And if any of you think that erasing her is a path to peace, you don't understand legacy. The room froze. He signed off with his full name, a date, and a final look directly into the camera. I didn't speak when it ended. I didn't need to. There was no yelling, no grandstanding, just silence. The kind that smothers pride. I left the hall without waiting for dessert. Back home, I sat on the edge of the bed and uploaded a 30-second clip to my social media page. The footage was from my security camera, Fenja, in my kitchen, whispering to Mother, "She's just a loose end, let her rot." I paired it with a scan of Dad's will, a photo of the trust clause, and the timestamp of the night they threw me into a snowstorm. The caption read, "This is how legacy is built in my family." By morning, #sewer trash. No more was trending. Journalists called. Local news ran a special segment titled Thrown Out for Truth, the Sophrona Jackson story. People messaged from places I'd never heard of. I was the discarded sibling too. Your story saved me from signing something I didn't read. Fenja posted a vague apology about deep family pain and privacy. Her comments were disabled within an hour. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. I sat in my now-cleaned trailer, sipping tea, watching the inbox flood. Not with hate, but with grief. Recognition, relief. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who finally stopped letting guilt write my silence. I read one more message before shutting my laptop. I never knew people like you existed. I whispered. Neither did I. The phone rang. It was Alifair. There's motion in court, she said. They want to settle quietly. I laughed, not cruelly, just tired. They can't afford quiet anymore. And I hadn't even told them what was in the second trust yet. Silence had become my weapon. Not the kind used to shame or surrender, but the kind that sharpens when no one's looking. I'd stopped speaking in rooms where no one listened a long time ago. And now that silence had written my signature on a courthouse document. The notification came in a plain envelope. Legal, precise. Formal recognition that my petition had been reviewed, verified, and approved. My claim was legitimate, my stake reinstated. Justice doesn't always scream through a gavel. Sometimes it's a line in a motion no one sees coming. I didn't announce it. I didn't text anyone or post a quote with a passive-aggressive flourish. I went to the bank. The woman at the desk pulled up the new account details and smiled. That professional kind of smile people use when they realize they're standing in the presence of leverage. I signed the papers. I didn't rush. When she handed over the final document, I said, "Thank you." And that was it. I stepped outside, the Montana sky clear and endless above me. I looked up for just a second. No clouds. No wait. This wasn't revenge. It was return. I drove home with the windows down, heater on full blast. The wind tangled in my hair like it had been waiting to be let in. A radio station played an old Tracy Chapman song, something about promises and open roads. I didn't sing along. I just listened. 2 days later, I woke to my name trending again. A local podcast, Legacy's Lies, had dropped a surprise episode, When Bloodlines Break. The host didn't bother with subtlety. "We've obtained exclusive audio from a charity gala attended by Fenja Hackman," he said. In it, she describes her sister as emotionally erratic and the artistic black sheep. Let's take a listen. There it was, her voice laughing over wine, careless in front of the wrong ears. I mean, she paints or whatever, lives in a trailer. It's tragic, really, but we all have a role, right? Some people just make the story more digestible. Then the host played my viral clip from weeks prior, the one with Dad's voice. The snow, the will. He ended with, "You decide who's telling the truth, the one who signed away the house, or the one who was thrown out in the snow." By noon, I had 37 emails, 16 voicemails, and 3 voicemail-to-texts that started with, "We're deeply sorry." None of them were from Fenja. Journalists started calling again. Some wanted interviews. Others offered entire segments. I declined them all. I didn't need to say a word. The tape spoke louder than I ever could. That afternoon, I drove out to the family land. My land. Legally now. Not borrowed, not begrudged, not ignored. There's a spot at the edge of the eastern fence line Dad used to call the lookout point. You could see the hills roll for miles from there, even into the next county on a clear day. He used to take his thermos out there and just sit. I brought mine too. I sat. I listened to the wind stir the brush. Then I played his message again, from the old recorder I kept on my keychain now. "You're the mirror they won't look into." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I whispered, and now, the mirror has shattered right across their reflections. By evening, as I unpacked groceries in the kitchen, Alifair called. "They're requesting a family meeting," she said. "In person, full legal presence. Their side will have 2 attorneys." I didn't hesitate. "Let them bring their lawyers." She paused. "Sophrona, I'll bring the truth." I hung up, leaned against the counter, and stared out at the darkness. And this time, I wouldn't be the one walking out. The letter came on heavy cardstock. No handwriting, no warmth, just clean serif font, perfectly aligned. The family's legal team wanted to settle. Their offer? A partial payout, gag order, and a unified family statement drafted by a PR firm that probably never even learned how to spell my name. They'd spent months silencing me in whispers. Now they wanted to pay me for my silence in writing. I read the letter once, folded it neatly, and slid it into the trash. They mistook my quiet for compliance, I said aloud, mostly to myself. But now, silence was no longer an act of grace. It was a currency I refused to spend. I didn't call Alifair. I didn't need to. We both knew what came next. 2 days later, I pulled into the gravel drive of the estate. This time, I didn't park at the edge. I drove right up to the front steps. A locksmith followed behind me. So did the sheriff's deputy, who was only there to ensure the transition was peaceful. I had the title deed in hand, stamped, notarized, irreversible. The key turned without resistance. Inside, the air still carried traces of the artificial floral spray. Fenja loved to drown every room in, the same smell she used at Dad's wake, the same one that made the house feel more like a showroom than a home. I walked from room to room. Every corner was layered with memories, some fragile, some rotting. The master bedroom had been turned into a parade of designer chaos. I opened the closet. Labels, price tags, boxes never opened, not one photo of Dad. I cleared it out within an hour. Then I brought in his armchair, the one I'd kept all these years in storage. I placed it by the window, exactly where it had been for 30 years, facing the trees, facing the place he used to sit with his coffee and morning paper. I didn't reclaim this house for pride. I did it because sometimes justice comes with drywall and hope. By the end of the week, the wine cellar Fenja had planned became a reading room stocked with donated books and soft chairs. The media room turned into a counseling space. The garage had new shelves labeled baby supplies, warm coats, job training kits. Then came the sign. Opening day arrived with overcast skies and cold air. It didn't matter. People still came. Reporters, volunteers, mothers holding toddlers, a veteran with a cane, a high school teacher I hadn't seen since sophomore year. A local councilwoman stood beside me, holding back tears as she read the newly installed brass plaque aloud. House of the Forgotten, for those who were once told they didn't belong. Below it, a second sign. Hand-carved from oak, sewer trash no more. The cameras clicked. A photographer snapped a shot of me hugging a young mother with a newborn wrapped in flannel. That image made the local evening news, then state news. Then it ran in the national feed under the headline, "The sister they tried to erase now runs the shelter they never built." My inbox swelled again. "I saw you on the news. You stood up for all of us. I kept quiet for years. You gave me permission to stop." My voice didn't echo anymore. It rang. It warned. And it welcomed. That night, Fenja went live on social media. A shaky live stream. She was in some studio-looking space, lips glossed, face strained. She claimed the audio clips were taken out of context, that family matters are complicated, that we all say things we regret. The comments rolled in faster than she could delete them. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat in the new reading room, a mug of tea in hand, watching a boy read Charlotte's Web out loud to his little sister. I walked to the fireplace and placed a framed photo of Dad right on the mantel. Just him, smiling. No filters, no edits. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you restore when no one thinks you can. Just before midnight, Alifair texted. Alifair. They filed a motion to dismiss the original will, claiming Dad was coerced. They're taking it to trial. I stepped outside into the cold and stared up at the sign one more time. My fingertips traced the word forgotten, carved in brass. If they wanted war, I whispered. I had no weapons, only proof. And that's always enough. The envelope arrived midweek, stamped with a law firm's name I didn't recognize. Inside, a letter thick with legalese and the familiar stench of desperation. They were challenging Dad's mental capacity at the time the will was signed. I read it once, then again. Each line was a dance of technical phrases aimed at one thing, erasing what had already been made clear. Even now, they couldn't speak plainly. Everything had to be masked under paper, clauses, and spin. I looked up from the letter and into the laughter spilling from the reading room down the hall. A boy was trying to convince another to trade books. One of the mothers I'd helped just last week sat nearby, correcting grammar on a scholarship application. I folded the letter and tossed it on the kitchen counter, unreadable ink face down. I wasn't fighting for ownership anymore. I was protecting peace. Later that day, I met Alifair in her office. She poured us both tea instead of coffee, a subtle nudge to keep this meeting grounded. They're going to trial, she said. We can fight this hard, call witnesses, go after them for damages. You'd win, I have no doubt. I took a breath. I know. But? She prompted. I stared at my hands. But I don't want to drag this any further. She leaned back. You sure? Dad said something once, I murmured. You don't need to win every war. Just live in a way they can't deny your strength. She nodded slowly. That's not weakness. That's design. I made my decision right then. No countersuit, no press conference, no dragging them through the dirt they willingly buried themselves in. I wrote a short statement for the press. It read, "I forgive what doesn't deserve forgiveness, not because they changed, but because I did." The media picked it up fast, but this time the tone shifted. Headlines leaned toward reflection, not scandal. The drama lost its steam. People stopped asking who won and started asking what came next. A week later, a letter came in the mail. Not typed, handwritten, slanted and tight, from Fenja. "I don't know if you'll ever believe me, but I thought I was protecting the family from shame. I was wrong." I read it twice. Didn't cry, didn't tremble. I walked to the back of the house, opened the drawer labeled closed chapters, and slid it inside. Some things you respond to, some you simply outgrow. That letter was both. Days blurred into calm. The shelter thrived. A mother I'd met through a food bank was now volunteering at the check-in desk. She greeted each person like they were arriving home. A retired Marine offered to fix the roof for free after he'd overheard one of the pipes was cracked. Then he showed up every Tuesday just to tinker. One afternoon, a young woman stepped inside with 2 kids in her arms. Her coat was threadbare, her voice low. "I saw your story online," she said. "I left with nothing, but I figured, if you made it out." I didn't let her finish. I handed her the guest key. "You're safe now." That night, I walked into the admin office, lifted a small frame, and hung it over the desk. Dad's words, etched in soft silver. "The legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we prove can't be taken." I sat for a while. No laptop, no music, just the sound of someone vacuuming down the hall and a kettle whistling faintly from the kitchen. I never needed to rebuild my name. I just needed to stop letting others sign it for me. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done since everything began. I drove out to the cemetery. No flowers, just a folded piece of paper and a quiet heart. The sun was out, but the wind stayed cold. The kind of cold that reminds you life keeps moving whether or not you're ready. I walked to Dad's headstone, knelt down, and placed the letter from Fenja at its base. I weighed it down with a small, smooth stone. "Let her words rest," I whispered, "where your truths always lived." I stood slowly. My coat flapped in the breeze, the trees behind me creaking gently like they'd heard something worth remembering. And if they ever wondered how far I'd come, this time, they'd have to look behind them. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Fenja arrived flanked by 2 lawyers. Our mother followed, wearing the same tight-lipped expression she'd worn to Dad's funeral. They sat in their row, stiff, rehearsed. I walked in without fanfare, just Alifair behind me and a folder in hand. They brought strategy. I brought truth. Before the judge spoke a word, I could feel the weight in the room. The air shifted the moment Alifair filed the supplemental trust clause, the one no one expected, not even the opposition. The silence wasn't just procedural, it was recognition. This clause had been sealed in a separate folder, only to be activated under very specific terms. And those terms had just been met. It stated that any party who challenged Robert Hackman's mental fitness posthumously would forfeit their entire inheritance, irrevocable, final. The judge scanned the language, paused, then nodded. Alifair slid over a notarized audio clip, Dad's voice reading the clause aloud, verified by his physician weeks before his passing. Medical records supported his cognitive clarity. Fenja didn't move. Our mother blinked too fast, her hands tightening into fists around the court bench. The gavel didn't bang. It didn't need to. The ruling was clear. They had disqualified themselves. I didn't gloat. I didn't even glance their way. This wasn't revenge. It was realignment. And they had realigned themselves right out of everything. Outside the courthouse, I stepped toward the small crowd of reporters who'd gathered like cautious birds. One leaned forward. "Ms. Jackson, do you feel vindicated?" I looked at the microphone, then past it. My voice didn't waver. I didn't win today. Integrity did. And if you ever feel erased, I hope you find the courage to write yourself back in. I walked away before another question could be thrown at me. That evening, back at the shelter, we hosted a gratitude dinner. Nothing fancy. Lasagna, pie, a slow playlist of jazz. Guests laughed. Kids ran through the hall barefoot. No media, no tension. Just real people. After dessert, I stood near the front hallway and pulled back the curtain on a mural we'd worked on for months. It showed a winding tree growing out of a cracked concrete floor, its roots wrapping around forgotten objects, an empty chair, a weathered photo, a child's shoe. At the base, Dad's quote stretched across in deep gray, "Character outlives wealth." Applause filled the room, but my eyes locked on a young woman sitting at the end table with her daughter in her lap. I walked over, crouched beside her, and placed a small silver key in her hand. "This is for the cottage behind the lot. You and your daughter start fresh tomorrow. You don't owe anyone a reason." She didn't speak, just clutched the key like oxygen. They tried to own legacy. I learned how to live it. Later that night, I sat alone in my room. Not the old trailer, not a temporary corner of someone else's story, my space. I took the court summary from my bag, read through each line carefully, then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside Dad's envelope marked "For her eyes only." Then I pulled out a blank page and scribbled 5 words. Not guilty, not invisible, not broken. I tucked that note into the same drawer. The sun was setting through the window behind me, washing the room in amber and quiet. For the first time in years, I felt still. I thought the verdict I needed was theirs, but I already gave myself the one that mattered. A knock came at the door. A delivery man handed over a flat box, no return address. Inside was a black and white photo, me and Dad, years ago, me maybe 12, standing next to him in front of the old barn. I don't remember the moment the photo captured, but our faces were easy, unfiltered, real. On the back, a post-it note in unfamiliar handwriting. "He was always proud. You just couldn't hear it then." I didn't try to figure out who sent it. Some things don't need answers, just peace. I wasn't the one they erased. I was the one they couldn't rewrite.